Has anyone ever looked right through you like you weren't even there? Like you were just furniture? If that's happened to you, you're going to understand every word of what I'm about to tell you. My grandson's college graduation was supposed to be one of the happiest days of my life, and it was right up until the moment I met the girl he was planning to marry. I'd driven 4 hours to get there. Alone, because that's how it's been since my husband passed 8 years ago. I didn't mind the drive. I had my coffee in the cup holder and the radio on low. And I spent most of those 4 hours just thinking about my grandson, thinking about the little boy who used to fall asleep on my lap watching old westerns, who called me every Sunday even through high school when most boys his age couldn't be bothered. He was the one who inherited his grandfather's quiet steadiness, the one I never had to worry about. Or so I thought. I wore my good blue dress, the one I saved for church and the occasions that matter. I even went to the salon the week before, which I don't do often because, frankly, I've never seen the point in spending $50 on something I can do myself, with a brush and a little patience. But this was different. This was his day. I wanted to look like I'd made the effort. I found my seat in the auditorium and watched him walk across that stage, and I'll be honest with you, I cried. Not the polite kind of crying where you dab at the corner of your eye. The real kind. The kind that sneaks up on you because you suddenly see the whole span of a person's life compressed into one moment, and you think about his grandfather not being there to see it, and your chest gets tight, and your vision blurs, and you don't even care who's watching. Afterward, there was a reception in the courtyard outside. Families milling around with plastic cups of lemonade, everyone in their good clothes, everyone smiling. My grandson found me first. He threw his arms around me and lifted me half off the ground the way he's done since he was about 14, and first realized he was taller than me. I told him I was proud of him. He said he knew. That's the thing about him. He's never been one to fish for compliments. He just quietly knows when something is real. Then he said, "Grandma, come meet Vanessa." He'd told me about her. Not a lot, because he's not a talker when it comes to his personal life, but enough. They'd been together about a year and a half. He said she was smart, that she worked in finance, that her family was from Connecticut. I'd formed no particular picture of her. I was just glad he was happy. She was standing with her parents near the fountain, tall, put together, wearing the kind of dress that probably cost more than my monthly electric bill. Her mother had that particular look some women get, the careful kind of beauty that takes a long time every morning and makes you hold yourself very still, like you're afraid of disturbing something. Her father was in a dark suit, silver hair, the kind of man who carries himself like he expects doors to open before he reaches them. My grandson put his hand on the small of my back and guided me over. "Vanessa," he said, "this is my grandmother." She looked at me. And I know how to read a look. I've had 67 years of practice. This one lasted less than a second, but I caught it. The quick flicker from my sensible shoes to my blue dress to my hair, and the almost imperceptible settling of her expression into something pleasant and polished and entirely empty. "How lovely," she said. She had a firm handshake, the kind you're taught. Then she turned to her parents, and this is the part that I keep coming back to. The part that still makes something tighten in my chest when I think about it. She said with a little laugh in her voice, not a mean laugh, which almost would have been better, but a light, dismissive one. The way you might mention something mildly amusing, "This is Caleb's grandmother. She runs a little pottery business out in the country somewhere." Her father smiled at me the way you smile at a child who said something sweet but not quite relevant. Her mother said, "How charming." And that was it. They turned back to each other, and I was gone. Still standing there, still breathing, still holding my plastic cup of lemonade, but gone. Vanished. Reclassified. My grandson's jaw had gone tight. I felt it more than saw it. I know that jaw. I've known it since he was 3 years old and trying not to cry when he scraped his knee. He was trying to decide what to say. I put my hand briefly on his arm. I shook my head just slightly. I know how to choose my battles, and I know that a graduation reception in front of 200 people is not the place to fight them. I smiled at Vanessa's parents and said it was very nice to meet them. I excused myself to find more lemonade that I didn't actually want. Now, I need to tell you something, because otherwise the rest of the story won't make sense. I do run a pottery business. That part was technically true. What Vanessa didn't know, what she clearly hadn't thought to ask, hadn't thought to find out. Because why would you bother finding things out about someone who registered to her as unimportant, was what that business actually was. My husband and I started it together 34 years ago. A small studio on our property in Western Virginia, about 60 acres of land that his family had owned since before either of us was born. In the beginning, it really was small. Weekend classes, a few pieces sold at local markets, something we did because we loved it, and because the land gave us room to breathe. But my husband had a gift, not just for the clay itself, though he was extraordinary with his hands, but for understanding what people were drawn to, what they wanted to bring into their homes and why. He started teaching workshops that people drove hours to attend. He wrote 2 books on hand-building techniques that are still used in programs across the country. I handled the business side, the accounts, the contracts, the expansion. When he passed, I didn't sell. I kept it going because it was his and mine, and I wasn't ready to let it become what we'd built, quietly, over 34 years, was something that now employed 22 people, ran residential programs that were booked out 18 months in advance, and had a client list that included several interior designers whose names you would recognize in at least one museum that commissions us annually for their gift shop. I don't talk about this at parties. I never have. My husband used to say that the people worth knowing don't need you to prove anything, and the people who need you to prove it aren't worth knowing. The Monday after graduation, I was back in my studio. I had a consignment to finish, a set of serving pieces for a hotel opening in Nashville. And I had a workshop starting Thursday with 12 participants who'd been on our wait list for over a year. One of those participants, as it happened, was a man named Soren. I didn't know him when he signed up. His assistant had booked the slot and paid the deposit. He arrived Thursday morning in a car that my studio manager recognized immediately, though she had the good sense not to make a fuss. I was in the back courtyard setting up when she came to find me with slightly wider eyes than usual. "The man in the blue shirt," she said quietly. "Do you know who that is?" I looked. Blue shirt, somewhere around 60, the kind of tan that comes from spending real time outdoors rather than a tanning bed. Unremarkable in the way that genuinely confident people often are. "Should I?" said. She told me his last name. It took me a moment, and then it connected. He was one of the founders of a commercial real estate development company that operated across the eastern seaboard. Not a name you'd necessarily know unless you followed that industry, but the company. I knew the company because we had done a commission for one of their lobbies 4 years ago, a significant commission. I went and introduced myself the same way I introduced myself to everyone in a workshop. First name, brief explanation of what we'd be doing over the next 5 days, no ceremony. He shook my hand and said, "I've admired your work for years, the Meridian lobby piece. I've walked past it probably 300 times. "That one took 7 months, I said. "It shows," he said, in the best possible way. I liked him immediately. There's a certain kind of person who shows up to learn something with complete, undefended beginner's mind. No performance, no need to demonstrate that they already know things. He was that kind of person. He laughed easily when his bowl collapsed, which it did twice on the first day the way everyone's does. We talked during lunch breaks. He told me his wife had passed 2 years ago, that he'd been looking for something to do with his hands, something that required his full attention and didn't care about his net worth. I understood that completely. I didn't think anything more of it. The following Saturday, my grandson called. He sounded the way he sounds when he's worked something through and come out the other side of it. Quieter, more deliberate than usual. He said, "Grandma, I need to tell you something, and I need you to not make it about you being upset on my behalf, because I know you will be, and I need to get through this." I sat down at my kitchen table. He told me that the week after graduation, he'd had a conversation with Vanessa about what she'd said, how she'd introduced me to her parents. He said he tried to explain, and that she'd apologized, but that the apology was the kind that's really an explanation, that's really a defense. She'd said she hadn't meant anything by it, that she just didn't know how to describe what I did, that her parents came from a different world, and it was easier to keep introductions simple. He said he'd let it go. Tried to. Then, 2 weekends later, they'd had dinner with her parents at the family home in Greenwich. He said her father had spent most of dinner talking about some land deal they were involved in, a large parcel in Western Virginia they were looking to develop. Commercial zoning, the works. And midway through this conversation, her father had mentioned the current owner, a woman who ran some kind of craft studio on the property. Charming little operation, shouldn't be too hard to negotiate with, probably ready to retire. My grandson had gone very still, he said. I asked him the address. He told me. And I just sat there for a minute, and then I said, "That's my grandmother's property." He said the silence that followed was extraordinary. He said her father had looked at him, and then looked at Vanessa and said, slowly, "Your grandmother is Vivian Shenandoah Clayworks?" That's what the business is registered as. My husband's name for it. He loved the valley, loved the sound of it. My grandson said yes. He told me what happened next was a kind of scramble. Her father tried to recover. Oh, of course he'd known that. He just made the connection. What a small world. What a remarkable woman I must be. Vanessa went quiet in a way that apparently said quite a lot without saying anything. Her mother refreshed everyone's wine twice in 4 minutes. My grandson excused himself before dessert and drove home. He broke off the engagement the following Thursday. He told me this on the phone with such steadiness in his voice that for a moment I forgot he was only 24. He said it wasn't really about what her father had said, or about the land deal. It was about what Vanessa had done at the reception, and the fact that when he'd brought it up, she hadn't actually understood why it hurt him. Couldn't quite see the thing he was pointing at. He said, "She kept saying, 'Grandma, I didn't know.' But that was the problem. She didn't think she needed to know." I was quiet for a moment. I said, "I'm sorry. I know you cared about her." He said, "I know you're going to tell me I'll be fine." "I wasn't going to," I said. "I was going to tell you that I'm proud of you. For different reasons than graduation, but just as much." He laughed a little. The tight kind. I didn't hear from Vanessa's father directly. I heard through my attorney, who received a very carefully worded letter expressing his company's continued interest in various properties in the region, and their particular admiration for the Shenandoah Clayworks legacy, and their hope that if I ever considered any future conversations about the land, I might think of them first. I did not respond to that letter. What I did do was call Soren, who had come back for a second workshop in August, and by that point I thought of as something close to a friend. I told him the story, not because I needed advice, but because I'd found that he was the kind of person who listened without needing to fix things or offer perspective, who could just hear something and let it be what it was. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You know what the most expensive thing in the world is?" I said I didn't know. He said, "Underestimating someone who doesn't need your validation." I thought about that for a long time afterward. I think about it still. There's something I want to say, and I want to say it carefully because I don't believe in moralizing, and I don't think life is as clean as a lesson. But here's what I've come to understand. In 67 years of being a woman in rooms where people were making up their minds about me before I'd finished shaking their hand, the people who dismiss you are not seeing you. They're seeing their own map of the world, a map where certain kinds of people matter and certain kinds don't, where value announces itself with specific signals, and if you're not broadcasting those signals, you don't exist. That's not a character flaw exactly. It's more like a poverty of imagination, and you cannot shame people out of it, and you cannot explain your way out of it, and you cannot earn your way out of it because they are not doing math. They are doing something more reflexive than that. What you can do, what I've always tried to do, what my husband taught me by example, is simply be without apology and without performance, and let the world catch up when it does, and not much care when it doesn't. My grandson came to stay with me for a week in September. He spent most of it in the studio, which surprised me. He'd never shown much interest before. I taught him how to center clay on the wheel, which is harder than it looks and humbling in a way that I find useful. He was terrible at it, and he didn't mind. He sat at that wheel every morning and just tried. On the last day of his visit, we ate dinner on the back porch, and watched the light change over the valley. He asked me how I'd kept the business going after my husband died, whether it had been hard to keep showing up. I told him the truth, which was yes sometimes and also no, because the work itself is never the hard part. The work gives you something to be inside of. The hard part is the quiet that comes after, the empty chair, the habit of turning to say something, and there being no one there. He was quiet for a while. Then he said, "I want to build something that lasts like this does." I didn't ask what he meant. I knew what he meant. The first morning frost came that year in early October. I was in the studio before sunrise the way I always am, and the light came up slow over the ridge and turned the whole valley a color I can only describe as the inside of a seashell. I had clay on my hands and coffee going cold beside me, and 22 people who counted on this place and a grandson who was figuring out who we wanted to be. That's not a small life. That has never been a small life. And I have stopped expecting the Benices of the world to understand that. They will see what they see, and I wish them no ill, and I will not rearrange myself to fit inside their map. I am 67 years old. I have buried a husband and kept a business alive, and raised children who raised children and watched 67 winters come down off those mountains. I know who I am. I just don't always bother to announce it.